Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of SuperCoach, mates. Well, the AFL season is now just 2 weeks away. So we've had our first round of pre-season matches where Carlton and St Kilda supporters have already declared that they're winning the premiership. And I think Melbourne supporters are pretty good as well, especially after watching Kasai Pickett kick 5 goals against North Melbourne. But as per normal, I am joined by Thomas. How are you going, Thomas?
Yeah, not too bad. Lid's officially off, I think, with us destroying Gold Coast. But I guess we'll see how we go, obviously, against Essendon, which I'm assuming we would like to go quite strongly. And, then versus your mob in 2 weeks, which should be interesting, that's for sure.
Yes, it will be. So what we're going to do today is Thomas is going to do his team reveal with some supporting statistics from AFL Fantasy, which I know that they use a different scoring system for SuperCoach, but unfortunately, I don't know if SuperCoach score in the match simulation matches. I believe that they will score for the community series and then obviously the rest of the games throughout the home and away season. So I will hand it over now to Thomas, who's going to take everyone through his side and talk about some of the perhaps decisions that he's been pondering over.
Yeah, so if you follow us on X, I posted the team reveal or some sort of team reveal to what I'm going to be using throughout the AAMI series and kind of judging off. They've made a fair few changes since my kind of, December team reveal or whenever we did it early January. But yeah, obviously match simulation, you got to take with a grain of salt, the pressure's right off and things like that. So yeah, it's not going to be a real accurate representation of what you expect come game day. Like the last decision, like the worst kind of possible decision that you should make is pick all the top players that did well in the AAMI series and the match sim, because it's never really going to translate fully into game day. But it gives you some idea of where players are at, especially with time on ground and things like that, and have an idea what rookies are kind of ready to go for round one. But what we'll do today is, as Nathan said, we'll review my side. You would have seen it on Twitter if you're following us, but it'd probably be a good chance to discuss kind of the thinking behind a few players and how they scored as well on the AAMI preseason game, the match simulations. Obviously, the stats that I've got are from a bloke called, I think it's Fantasy Keeper League. We'll chuck his socials down the bottom of this video, but he's pretty much the only person around, I think, on Twitter that's put out a bloody good effort to get the scores out or some sort of scoring representation, which is obviously really helpful when it comes to picking a side.
I've got them all here as well on my screen for all the games as well. I found someone here who's posted them all.
Yeah, so we'll have some idea when we discuss it, but just to keep it nice and short, we'll go through kind of my team as it stands so far, just flicking the actual screenshot on my phone, so I know who I'm guessing. But yeah, some players that haven't moved at all, Nazai Wanganeen Miller and Connor Rosie are two that straight off the bat haven't left my side at all. Look, I know I've heard this conversation a lot on Twitter about Naz being faded by some and picking him up later. Look, I think at the end of the day, you'd be kicking yourself if you don't pick him up and he goes bananas. He didn't play, full minutes against Gold Coast and he completely destroyed him around when he had the ball. Yes, he's not going to be the focal point, I think, of every single attack like it was last season, but definitely a lot of the ball is going to go through him. I just have a feeling that, he's going to dominate through patches in the middle. He probably won't get as many free possessions as he normally does off the half back, but I could also see if teams start to tag him in the midfield, he just floats to half back. And it's been showed against Melbourne when he got tagged down back and in the middle, he went forward and had an impact. So I think you just can't really go wrong with him. His ceiling is also, his floor is also really good. Rose is another one that super consistent. I think this season should really be a driving factor for Port Adelaide. He hasn't left my side at all. McCarthy's another one which I'm denied with. Nathan's probably got a little bit better idea of Tom McCarthy, but seemed to impress okay in Frio's match. I'm pretty sure he played mid in that game. Scored 75 AFL fantasy, so pretty solid statistics. Just to give you a heads up, usually AFL fantasy scores lower than SuperCoach in most aspects. Like the scoring is generally lower. 75 is a pretty good score come AFL fantasy, because I think like the top scores in AFL fantasy hit like 120 max. So yeah, anything around that 70 up mark's pretty good idea that they're capable of scoring 90 plus in SuperCoach. I think he's one that, yeah, I think the conversation between him and Marich, I think is another one. I don't know if he's forward or defence this year, but because McCarthy's playing more midfield, I don't know if that opens up the spot for Marich to solely dominate that half-back line, which he seemed to do in that Pracky game. So, yeah, I think he's one to consider if you want a bit of a point of difference. But I would also not go too heavily on West Coast players, considering they could get pretty beaten up this season. But, yeah, that's the structure I'm looking at. I know our SuperCoach community team is going to look a little bit different. We've got a few more premiums in there. But just for my own team, Naz, Rosie and McCarthy kind of line up the three. Look, you can interchange them accordingly. I had Lockie Ash for large parts of the last couple of weeks, but have freed up some cash to get McCarthy and utilise it elsewhere. I think, from that 500k upwards, those players that are relevant, I don't see too much differential between them. So I think, you're saving yourself a bit of money here and there. And the rookies riding out, as I said, look, you could paint a broad brush over these rookies, but Samuel, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Gridge, I think it is, or whatever it is. He really impressed in that Tigers Dons game, almost top scored for the Tigs at 98. He'll be a really popular selection, I think, regardless. Even at that heightened price, there's probably other rookies out there that, look, you could argue against the high price tag, but he's one that probably comes with an adequate price, with how he's scoring. Lindsay from West Coast Eagle, 122k, will be heavily popularly owned. Lockie Jacks, which is, I think, one that came pretty late in the preseason piece, if I can find his bloody name. Yeah, Lockie Jacks scored 82 AFL fantasy points, just dominated. Look, Bailey Dale, I don't know if he played a full game or not, but he was heavily impacted by the likes of Bailey Williams and Lockie Jacks. Connor Buderick also was there. Look, I think Dogs are one of those sides in general that share the ball around a lot in the back line. They're not really a slingshot team. They like to chip and mark now. They've got a few more players down there. They really like the use off their half back line. A lot of the ball goes through the likes of Dale and Williams and Caleb Daniel as well when he was playing there. So, look, I would say you can't go wrong with Jacks, whether he's a D6 or on the bench. But the other two that I've got are Farrow, who's 160k, who I think he scored about 50, 60 odd. AFL Fantasy didn't look too bad at all. And then Josh Gibkiss. I think Gibkiss is one that, look, he's going to play. He's going to be in the best 18 for the Tigs, but don't expect him to score massive. I think coming off, multiple serious knee injuries, and also his scoring is probably geared towards SuperCoach rather than fantasy. Yes, he can score pretty poorly, but I think he's one that's going to be consistent. All he needs is a few spike games to rise in price and someone that you can kind of rely on as a consistent moneymaker. I know Jai Sarong was a name that was thrown out there, but speaking to a few Swans fans, he seems to be going down the pecking order a little bit in the best 18. But what are your thoughts, Nathan? Obviously, we'll look at your side next week, but what are your thoughts in general? Are you following the same structure in the defensive line, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I've got the exact same top three. I don't think you can go wrong with any of them. I think Nasiah will feast on Collingwood, given that they don't tag. So I think that will be a game that Nasiah can rip apart. Connor Rosie, I think he can go even better than last year, to be honest. To be honest, from what I've heard, I reckon he's about 40k underpriced on probably where he could be. So I think at 568k, I've actually got right now, I've got the captaincy on him, on Rosie. Obviously that is subject to change. And then I've also got Tom McCarthy there. Basically since the podcast where I gave him a bit of where I said he was probably a bit overpriced, and then watching the max sim for West Coast, he basically hasn't left the side since, my side anyway, since then. So, perhaps sometimes you have to eat your own words. I think perhaps I might with McCarthy here, especially if I keep starting him. And the rookies, look, I still think the caveats out on some of these rookies, but I wouldn't mind if I can just get the Suns ones. I wouldn't mind having another look at Zeke Uland from the Suns. He's 199k, but he only got the 32 points, fantasy points. He only had 9 disposals, so I think he might have been on managed minutes. And the other one who actually impressed as well was Archie Roberts for Essendon. He basically played in the centre, bounced a lot of the
Yeah.
midfield for a lot of the game for Essendon. So I can see his ownership going up. But yeah, as I said, I think most people would have Nasiah and Rosie, and then I think you know, a lot of that third sort of premium defender will come about. Because if I have a look now, the most popular defenders are Zeke Yuland and then Connor Rosie at 57%, Nasiah at 50%. And then the other sort of higher priced one is Colby McKercher, who's at 36%.
Mhm.
And then it's Tom McCarthy at 12. So I
Yeah.
think most people have three of those sort of four names that I mentioned as their premium defenders. So yeah, as I said, I'll sort of talk more about my team next week.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with any of those picks there so far. And obviously, as I said, the rookies, their caveats there on the rookies. We'll just have to wait and see who gets named for round one. But there are a few rookies, yeah, that I sort of am keeping my eye on.
Yeah, 100%. I think you nailed it on the head there. Rookies, I think, will get a really good indicator first of all if they're named in the starting side for the AAMI series. For those of you who are new to SuperCoach, yeah, usually the AAMI series is a very good indicator of the final round one side, barring a few injuries here and there. But you know, I would look. Obviously, scoring is a big issue for some rookies, and we'll talk about that a bit later in this episode. But yeah, I'd be looking at time on ground and how long they're playing, where they're playing, because definitely a few rookies I've had in my side before the match sim games, and have taken them out of my side based off what I've heard from, you know, what I've heard and seen of the players as well. That's something to definitely take into consideration. Not necessarily like obviously Lockie Jacks is not going to score, or Jacks, whatever his name is, 82 every single week. So yeah, take the scoring part of it with a grain of salt. You know, particularly halfbacks. I think in the past, I know historically Jaden Short seems to eat every team alive in the preseason games and then shits the bed round one. So yeah, a lot of pressure off the ball is released in those match sim and AAMI games. So yeah, especially halfbacks. I think that's a massive caveat in this episode. But moving on to the midfield, look, I think I had to cough up the money for Bontempelli and Butters if I can get their names up. I think I initially wanted all three, Bontempelli, Butters, and Dacos. I can still probably achieve that. But I think for now, Butters and Bont look really good in the Vic's game. He didn't play in the preseason game, but the match sim game. But yeah, Butters I think is a real big point to prove in a contract year. Look, I think if you all went all three with Dacos, Bont, and Butters, I think you're breaking the bank to some degree. And you probably have to make sacrifices elsewhere, but that's a really strong three midfield. And I think the one thing that you got to be careful of, I know I've seen a lot of teams on Twitter and Instagram and whatever, where they're sacrificing other positions, sacrificing their midfield to kind of upgrade elsewhere. You got to be aware that you really want one or two players you can just rely on captaincy week in, week out. Captaincy is arguably the most important thing in SuperCoach, you know, compared to other AFL fantasy games.
Make or break.
Yeah, like I know I've been playing Fantasy Premier League at the moment, both in SuperCoach and in the actual Premier League side, and I know that is a little bit different with how you go about picking captaincies, and it doesn't make a substantial difference. But yeah, definitely captaincies in SuperCoach is a massive difference, for sure. But yeah, Bont and Butters haven't left my side all season, or they've been in and out, but I wasn't going to really let go of them. The next one in line is Errol Goulden. I think he's one that's been really impressive for the Swans. Look, I know that. Let me just get that photo up so I can see what I'm picking. Look, he was one that you know, I toyed leaving out with, but I think his price 566k, scored over 100 in the match sim. You can't go wrong with Goulden. He's such a big kind of important factor for the Swans when it comes to the ball movement and things like that. Everything goes through him and Blakey. It seems like they've kind of transitioned away from the chip mark kind of style with Jake Lloyd and stuff, getting a lot of possessions and stuff like that. But yeah, for sure, Goulden and Blake are going to play a big part in getting that ball quickly through the Swans back line and through the midfield. Goulden is also one that plays in various positions as well. He's one that, the Swans dictate a lot of their ball play around. So, yeah, Goulden's in it for me. Next in line is my mate Jack Steele, who's I'm still gutted he left St Kilda very late in the trade period, but I did wanted to see how he'd go against. Obviously it was pretty easy opposition and North's matched him, but looked really impressive. I think he's got a big point to prove. I've been a bit bullish on him in preseason with how he's going to go this year, and in the case of, yes, there's been disappointment about not being at St Kilda anymore and where his kind of status lied in that regards. But yeah, definitely one that has a massive point to prove for Melbourne. And with, as I've said before, with Gawn tapping it down his throat, I don't think he can get much worse than what he was putting out at St Kilda. And that was already pretty good. And at 510K, I think he's slightly discounted. I think he's going to complement that midfield really well. Yes, it was only a match sim game. I think he scored 106 fantasy, which was really impressive by him. But I guess wait onto the real stuff to pick him. He's one that I'm happy to upgrade to a Dacos if need be, or another premium midfielder by downgrading one of my forwards. After that, looking at the mid prices, there wasn't too many that I could pick just because of the price and stuff like that. But Parrish was the pick of the bunch. Look, I kind of wanted to keep it to a maximum of two 500k mids and two 300k mids, and I picked one of each essentially. I could, easily flip to two 300s, but Parrish is the pick of the bunch. If you want to kind of pick my brain with regards to who the options were, it was basically Parrish, Young, or Cogs. Young didn't look overly impressive in the Freo West Coast match sim. He played predominantly mid forward. I think he's one that can score very well, but also can score not the best, especially with Brayshaw and Sarong dominating that midfield. Look, Cogs is another one that could be serious speculation with the likes of Kelly being out for basically the whole year. You've got ACL. Tom Green's on his ACL. Darcy Parish is one that I think, on the flip side, probably doesn't have the competition the others do for spots in that midfield. And I think Esami crying out for him and his consistency in that midfield apparently didn't really disappoint. It's got about 71-ish in the AFL fantasy realm. And yeah, it looked really, really solid. So I think he's a lock for me. And then the rookies, look, they'll chop and change until the end, until prior opening round. But what I've got in there is Sharp from the Dons, another rookie that seems to do okay. Seems like a lot of these Essendon rookies score pretty well or pretty consistently. Jagger Smith, I think, should be locking everyone's side. He's one that's been uber consistent as a rookie and as a midfielder, hasn't stepped a foot out of place coming back from ACL. Jack Carroll is an interesting one. He's been playing off half back, seems to have taken over Hunter Clark's spot. Hunter Clark played that half back spot a lot of last season and just didn't look as consistent and just looks slow. He looks like he shed a lot of kilos over pre-season, so I think he'd be fighting for a spot in, but I think Carroll's just got that half back spot alongside Liam Stocker and Jack Sinclair. So I think you'll see a pretty good moneymaker from him early days as long as he keeps his spot. And then the other bench spot, Brody, look, he's been said he's going to play ahead of Ollie Wines because Ollie Wines isn't playing for the first bit. But, you got to wait and see, I guess, with whether does he continue playing in the best 22 after that. But he's one that we know can score very well. Patrick Rechko, sorry, I'm not exactly sure how he went in preseason, but he's a placeholder for now. And also Finn McRae, his name, not Jack McRae, Finlay McRae, got the mid forward DPP. Look, one warning I'd say is don't go nuts on these Eagles rookies and Richmond rookies. Really do take into consideration whether they're actually playing round zero. I think, yes, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for Eagles rookies and Richmond rookies particularly, but I think you got to be careful not overstocking on them because we also last year with particularly the Tigers and West Coast, there were at times where all players just scored and shut the bed because they got absolutely smashed. So I wouldn't rely on those two teams in particular to get rookies from. But yeah, they're ones that you're going to get games into anyway. But what are your thoughts, Nath? Obviously, you're a Pies man and a Dacos owner as well, I think. But what are your thoughts on this midfield as you see it?
Yeah, well, I've actually got the Bomb Butters and Dacos combination.
Yep.
So I'm happy to pay up for those three. I've probably sacrificed Golden and Steel for Dacos instead, which I think in the long term will probably pay off. And then I've also got Darcy Parish as well, and I've also got Jaeger Smith as well. I think he's going to I think he's going to get games at Carlton. I think they're crying out for someone in that midfield who's got a bit of speed and whatnot. But I will echo your sentiments about those rookies, especially the rookies who have been delisted and re-picked up. There's probably a reason why they've been either traded or delisted. So I will just give a word of caution about picking guys like Finn McRae and Richard. I can't even say his name. I'm just going to call him Patrick. Um,
Yeah.
who have been traded from clubs because there's probably a reason why. I know Finn McRae was someone who was highly regarded at Collingwood, but unfortunately he was probably too good for the VFL and probably not quite at AFL standards. So,
Yeah.
I think that's got to come into consideration when you sort of picking these discarded rookies, if you will. I think I would much rather just go for rookies who have been drafted straight away. They haven't been delisted,
Yeah.
and just try and get them in, as opposed to pinning my hopes on Finn McRae all of a sudden becoming an A-grade midfielder, which probably isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I will echo your sentiments there, but otherwise, I've probably got a similar sort of setup.
Yeah.
I've probably got one less of those bigger midfielders, and I'm banking on one of those mid prices to sort of get them
Yeah.
up into that sort of 500-600K. But yeah, overall, I think my midfield will probably be quite similar to that.
Yeah, I think you've also got to take into consideration, and this is more so for after preseason games or AAMI games and into round zero, which rookies are playing and where, because that'll dictate how many rookies you have on field. I think a lot of people get sucked into picking rookies based off scoring and stuff like that and go, fuck it, let's put 3, 4 defender rookies in, and then realize half of them don't really score that well long term, and then you're stuck. So, look, I think, yes, there is a structured, generic structure to follow with the amount of premiums when on field, but I think where you put those premiums is another caveat as well, because I've seen in seasons gone by where you have the same amount of premiums, but the rookies on field, because of how your structure is based, really suffers your scoring. So, yeah, for example, it looks like at the moment the most consistent rookies look to be defender rookies and some midfield rookies. So would that mean you can sacrifice some of your premiums to make spots for them? Who knows? But yeah, that's one thing I'd keep in mind. Don't just copy a structure for structure's sake and force rookies into place. I think that's where the research comes in. That's where the players have done their research quite heavily will benefit, because the rookies are really dictate where your premiums sit in your team. That's for sure. And yeah, echoing what Nathan was saying with McRae in particular, he's a really good example of, yes, he's got that namesake of McRae, and historically, Jack McRae has been a really good accumulator of the ball. But knowing Finn McRae, having watched some footy of him, he just seems to be a player that is really good at VFL level, doesn't quite cut it at AFL level. So it's one of those players as well that you've got to really watch where they play and what position they play, time on ground, that sort of stuff. Because yes, there'll be spike games where they score really well, but consistency wise are what you're looking for. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't bring in Willem Dersma from the Eagles. He was playing on a wing, I think. And yes, he scored a goal, I'm pretty sure, off the wing and looked quite impressive. But playing on the wing is almost one of the hardest roles in footy from a SuperCoach perspective. So yeah, it's, compared to a Jagger Smith who's got centre bounce duties, you got Jack Carroll is a half backman, and you got to look at those things a little bit more than just the scoring. I think that's for sure. But moving on to the ruckman, look, we'll have this conversation in a minute, Nathan. It's interesting to see what your thoughts are on this, because I know this was one that was flaring up a fair bit across the weekend. But rucks at the moment, I've got, if I can bring it up, Brodie Grundy, who was a most recent addition because of price. I could afford him, and Luke Jackson at the moment. My bench player is Liam Reedy for no reason other than he might play, and I've got another ruck swing in my flex. But yeah, Brodie, Grundy, Jackson. I had English for the longest of times, but really do like Grundy. Yes, he has a buy, and yes, this might change if my buy structure doesn't quite add up with my players, particularly round 3 and 4, as someone pointed out on Twitter. But Grundy, I think, having seen him play, he just has these patches. I'll just bring up his stats quickly. He just goes through these patches where he just absolutely scores crazy amounts of points. He went from, if I can just bring this up quickly. So yeah, 2025. Brody Grundy, yeah. From, if I read his scores from round 9, he went 121. This is from round 9 till round 21. Round 121, 135, 109, 161, 155, 159, 179, 127, 154, 153, 137, and then 200. And then his low scores were, he had 154 against the Giants. But yeah, like, he's got crazy potential scoring, probably one of the best going around. Look, I know there's a lot of conversations about this ruck rule. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts about the ruck rule in particular, Nathan, how you see that rule being played out. But I think Grundy is a perfect hybrid of that rule. Has kind of the bigger, more strength of the bigger ruckman to compete physically one-on-one, and also have a bit of that leap and agileness to defeat those, Sherrys and Gorns and things like that. Jackson's another one that I think will benefit from the rule as well, but Freo have openly stated, he did this at the Vix WA game as well, but they're going to utilise him as a midfielder. So I think the biggest worry with Jackson was that he was going to be stuck up forward when Sean Darcy inevitably plays, and he plays however long before he gets inevitably injured. But yeah, Darcy playing an extra mid is a real scary proposition because he seems to be really good around his feet. You don't have to worry about him being stuck deep forward. He might still do that, but if he's around the ball, that's the biggest thing. And I think that's going to be a real weapon for Freo to have this 190 plus ruckman roaming around the midfield, and then being able to quickly sub into the bounces when needed if Darcy's cooked. But yeah, I think that's a big indicator of how it's going to go for Freo is where Jackson plays. And I think, when Jackson was a sole ruck, Freo looked way better than having a dual setup, in my opinion, at least. So I think the more they have Jackson around the ball and touching the ball, the better it is for Freo because of how dynamic he is. But yeah, what are your thoughts, Nathan? And I guess, first of all, with this rule, how do you see this being played out with some of these ruckmen?
Yeah, well, it was actually great to see Ruckman actually sort of jumping again and not engaging in wrestling. I watched the Collingwood, the first half of the Collingwood game. Unfortunately, I've been away on holiday for the past couple of weeks with no internet connection, and due to some car troubles, we ended up coming home early, which meant that I was able to watch the Collingwood game. And yeah, it was good to see the jumping ruckman sort of, get back into, their thing. Look, I'm just going to say now, I think Luke Jackson is just about the best ruckman in the league for SuperCoach this year. I think if you're not starting him, I think you're already behind the 8 ball, because not only can he ruck, but he can also play very well as a midfielder. And look, I know West Coast's ruckman probably wasn't the greatest. They had Flynn in there, and he basically just tore Flynn apart. So, look, I think if you're not picking Jackson, I think you're already behind the 8 ball. And yeah, I think Grundy is one who I will strongly consider too. The one who I did actually hear some negative stuff about was actually the big X, Tristan Cherry. I think I think I saw some people on social media say that he's one that's really going to get hurt by this new ruck rule, because he is a bit more of a wrestle ruckman. And he basically wasn't able to. And look, no disrespect here to Max Heath, but I don't think Max Heath is in the same class as Max Gawn. And if Tristan Cherry's going up against Melbourne's, I would say probably second or third ruckman, and he's basically only breaking even, then I think that's going to spell trouble for Tristan Cherry. So I wouldn't be surprised if his ownership plummeted.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think for my situation, I've locked Jackson in. He's basically locked away. It's just a matter of what I do with this second ruckman and whether or not I can I did have Tom De Koning there. I still would like to get Tom De Koning. But it's just a question of whether or not he actually plays. If he doesn't play in the AAMI Community Series game, then I'm probably going to have to fix around my side a little bit because I don't think I would pick someone with no exposure in the preseason at all. So that's sort of where I'm sitting now. But yeah, Jackson's been in there since day one, and yeah, I think he could be the number one player in SuperCoach by the end of the year. I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah, I think from a for St Kilda perspective, particularly to Conning, I know a lot of people have been considering him. I watched the whole or 3/4 of that Gold Coast Saints game, and the biggest thing I took away from it is you could clearly see the reason why Ross Lyon brought in De Koning. He really benefited from that ruck rule, particularly in centre bounces. Essentially, in the past, your more athletic types got bullied in that centre bounce by, say, a Gorn or Sherry bumping them out the way, but it seemed like Witts was given away, and Moyle as well, were given a lot of free kicks against De Koning in particular whenever De Koning tried to athletically get around him, and there's no other way just than illegally block him now. Which, yeah, going to your point, Nathan, with Sherry, I think that's the biggest issue with picking him now is he doesn't do much other than tap outs to advantage and then tackle the ball hits the deck. So, if he can't get these tap outs to advantage with more athletic ruckmans getting around him, he barely does anything. And this was my biggest problem with owning Sherry. Yes. Last year, yes, he was getting the scores that you needed him to. Like, he was getting 130s, 120s, whatever. But having watched the full game, the biggest problem with Sherry was he would just stagnate in quarters, and he'd dominate in either quarter one or quarter four in particular, and get a lot of hit outs to advantage early when the game was still on the line. He'd get tackles and get 50 points to quarter time, and then he'd just stagnate. You'd expect a ruckman like him, if you're getting that many points in quarter one, you're like, oh, sweet, we're set for 200 SuperCoach points, but that's obviously not the case with Sherry. So, yeah, as soon as that ruck rule came in, I think I ruled him out almost immediately because I just knew that it's almost like one of his strengths being that bully in the ruckman and pushing them out of the way. That's the biggest problem, I think, for Sherry. And, yeah, a big reason why you're probably right in saying that there could be a big dip in ownership for Sherry owners. But
Can I just quickly add as well? So the most popular setup for the ruck stocks, which as we're recording, which is Sunday the 22nd of February, Liam Reedy's number one, the Big X is number two, and Luke Jackson's third. And then
I could see that change pretty quickly.
There's a drop off to number four, which is Cooper Duff Tyler from West Coast. So I wouldn't be surprised if De Koning sort of came up a bit more and Cherry dropped off a bit more. But yeah, that's sort of how the ruck lineups are faring at the minute.
Yeah, I could see also De Koning's price being undervalued for what he is at 520. So yeah, he's one. English is another one that's very, very popular. The issue with English is he's had a shit 2 years, realistically speaking, struggling to adjust to these ruck rules and changes in them. And now we're looking at a ruck rule that may suit him. He just didn't light the house on fire. I think he's one that really has to improve himself worthy in the AAMI game to avoid warrant selection back in my side at least. And I think, yeah, Grundy, I know what I'm getting. English, I wouldn't be surprised he puts him some stinkers. He just doesn't get around the ground as he used to. But we'll see in due course. But yeah, the forward line here, we'll finish this off whilst I have the team. Harry Sheasel, F1. Look, I'd be interested to see your comments here, Nathan, because I'll give you his score. He scored 72 AFL Fantasy, which isn't the worst. Probably, close to 100 in AFL SuperCoach, sorry. But interesting to hear your thoughts in a minute, whether he's worthwhile actually picking, considering we've got a few other options there that are really impressive. Because I pick it, look, I think he hasn't moved out of my side all preseason. I think, yes, when Oliver and Petrarca left, they left a massive hole through that, and I think Pickett just fills that void nicely. He looked really, really impressive against North, and I think can cause some serious headaches through that midfield. Then I've got Max Hall. So my man, Max Hall, I think I mentioned on Twitter, he's going to be in my pod for the year. It'll be a live or die by the sword with him situation. I really rate how he is as a player. I think was definitely our most impressive young player going into last year. I did trade him out prematurely last year as a rookie, and then he, was averaging close to 100 for a little bit. And I think Hall is one that every time I've watched St Kilda play, he just is so clean with the ball, so effective with the ball. Yes, he did score 4 goals for his 115 AFL fantasy points, which probably, pushes a 130 in SuperCoach, 140. But he's just, really, really effective with the ball. He's never, ever going to get tagged in that midfield with the likes of Flanders in there now. So, Hall's maybe not first tier midfielder guaranteed each time because our centre bounce lineup was Nazaya, Philippou, and Flanders, which is obviously a pretty decent midfield in itself. But Hall, when he's playing half forward, he plays a high half forward role, pushing to the midfield as a floater as well. So he's one that I think, I'm hoping he does well, but 406k, it is a risky pick because it can go tits up pretty quickly with him priced that way. But I think if he manages to pump out some early hundreds, it'll put me in a really good position to upgrade later on if I need to. But I think if it goes completely south and he's hitting like 40s and 50s in the regular season, I'll probably make a trade straight away and adjust that accordingly and utilize that money elsewhere. But Hall's one that I'm bullish on. And look, he's not highly owned for probably good reason, but being not a super popular super coach pick in general. But one that I think is a real nice pod to have, in my opinion. Moving swiftly forward, I'm just going to bring up my camera again, my photos again, just so I know who I'm picking. So after that, Sam Flanders. This is probably a exclamation mark on anyone not wanting to pick him. Please pick him. This is not coming from a Saints fan anymore. This is coming from a SuperCoach player. He is going to score mass points in that midfield. Scored about 120 odd against Gold Coast. He just does it for fun. Look, we know how good he was at Gold Coast. It was mainly because Raul Anderson Miller took over in that joint, and he was playing a little bit all over the place. But playing in the midfield, yes, his disposal efficiency is a little bit questionable at times, but he just racks up for fun, and he's one that, look, you're probably looking at tagging Naz first ahead of Flanders, that's for sure. But he's been locked in from day one. He was at points my F2. For Connor Buderick is one at F5. He's one that was more so he can easily get out of the team. But he's one again, another pod that I think he's playing down back for the Bulldogs, I think. Scored 86 AFL fantasy, which was quite impressive against the Swannies. Look, he's one that I'll have to target real closely in the AAMI game just to see where he's at with regards to the possibility of his scoring potential, but he's one that I think he's going to be really impressive for the Dogs. They obviously targeted him in that trade period and got what they wanted. Look, he's easily one that can trade him out as well before round 0, but he's one at the moment just because I just be 100k floating around. And then after that, rookies, Mateus Philippou. Look, I think he's going to score a lot higher than a rookie. He should be in everyone's sides playing midfielder at the moment for the Saints. And then Leo Lombard looked really good in the Suns lineup. Yet to be seen whether he locks down a spot, but he's in there at the moment. Scored about 60 AFL fantasy. Didn't need 5 goals to do it. Was very lively. Was always in the right spot at the right time. The Suns are going to be quite dominant, I think, this year anyway. Even if they lost to us, they were missing, essentially their best 4 players in Raul, Anderson, Collins, and King. So when you put those guys in the mix, that makes it seriously competitive again. And Lombard, I could see being a big beneficiary of someone like Ben King flying up for the ball and then Lombard crumbing it. But bench player at best. I wouldn't put him on the field, that's for sure. I reckon he's capable of also scoring 40s and 50s. Dev Robertson, from what I've heard on socials, he's almost a lock for round 1. Obviously played at the Lions, never really got a good crack at it. But when he did come on, he looked pretty good for the Lions. So I could see him doing pretty well for the Eagles. I would suggest that if you're looking for an extra D6 spot, Robertson's probably your man. And at the moment, just because of monetary values, I've got what's his name, Lockie McAndrew for Adelaide. There's a few. Let me just bring up this flex. Lockie McAndrew. He scored 71 or 73. 73 AFL fantasy playing ruck against Ports Rucks, obviously. So nothing to scream home about, but looked pretty good. He was ahead of Riley O'Brien. Apparently, after the game, I heard Riley O'Brien was suffering from some sort of niggle, so maybe that's why they didn't pick. They picked McAndrew ahead. But I would say, my opinion personally, I know lots and lots of people have experimented with having a cheap R2, but I would say stay well away from that. Read Mitch Edwards, another one from the Cats that played an R1 position with the lack of Cats ruck stocks. But Greedy, McAndrew, Mitch Edwards, I'd be very cautious with doing that as an R2, particularly if then your R3 is a non-playing rookie, then you've got problems, I think, if they shit the bed. Having said that, if Reedy gets around one spot or Mitch Edwards gets around one spot and you want to do Mitch Edwards and then McAndrew R2, probably not the worst in the world. You're going to be able to save yourself about 500k to utilise elsewhere. So it really depends where you value your points. But as we've both preached on about a while, me and Nath are both in the camp of paying up for your rucks and then forgetting about them for the entire season, up bar injury. But what are your thoughts, Nathan, on the forward line? Obviously, this is probably more stacked than most, having seen a lot of teams even running Flanders as F2. But what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, well, very St Kilda oriented here. We got three St Kilda players in the forward line here, so I guess you've got to wear your own scarf at some stage. Sheasel, I think, picks himself. I read an interesting thing about Cy Pickett. So he actually attended less centre bounces than he did last year. In the match simulation game. So that's perhaps something just to keep an eye on, just to sort of see what that mix is going to be like. Perhaps the next AAMI community game, if he plays it, will give us a much better indication of sort of his split. Max Hall, yes, I do like the Max Hall pick as a point of difference. I don't think I'm game enough to do it, but if it pays off, it pays off. Flanders, enough said on that. I think if you haven't got Flanders, I think you're already behind the eight ball. I think he could easily be the number one forward at the end of the season, which for $396,000 is just basically begging to get picked. And then, obviously, as I said, the rookies, I've got Philippou as well. I think he's extremely talented. He just has never had a good run with it. So, if he can get his body right, I definitely think there's probably a spot there in that St Kilda midfield for him.
Yeah.
Dev Robertson, look, I would probably say preach the same thing with McRae. With that, the only difference being is that I genuinely think Robertson just couldn't fit into that Brisbane midfield. When when you've got Neil and the Ashcroft brothers and McCluggage running around there wouldn't be many players who could get into that midfield, to be honest. So perhaps he's an exception to that rule. And McAndrew, I think Riley O'Brien's one that's going to possibly be impacted by this new ruck rule as well. I think he's a bit more of a wrestler. So perhaps this was a ploy from the Adelaide coaching staff just to sort of see how McAndrew goes against some competition. He was only rucking against Vicentini, which I don't think would be Port Adelaide's first ruckman, although I think their first ruckman, Solder, I think he's
Solder.
Sweet,
I think Sweet was ahead of Solder in the pecking order, but Solder's out with an ACL. So essentially that ruck position is between Vicentini and Sweet, and I think how mobile. Oh, sorry, I was going to quickly say, I don't know how mobile Vicentini is, but Sweet's no mobile beast. So it's
So I think there's definitely a spot there, and then so it'd be interesting to see sort of how thing. But I will preach with Thomas, unless one of these 119k ruckmen get named, please don't pick R2 as McAndrew or something like that. You're just setting yourself up for failure. Even if one of them goes gangbusters in the AAMI Community Series game, I still probably wouldn't be game enough to pick them. Probably the only way I would pick one is Reedy, and that's if Pidney gets injured long term. And then Reedy basically will be Carlton's ruckman. So, the only way I would probably do it is if there's an injury to the club's number one ruckman, and the number two ruckman, has already been floating around. If it's, say, like, I don't know, Oscar Steen or Collingwood, if Darcy Cameron goes down and Oscar Steen has to play, I probably wouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, otherwise, yeah, I think it's a great team. Couple of points of difference there, which I think you always need to have them. And yeah, I think my feedback on that is probably you're ready for round 0, round 1.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones that look, it can change a lot come round 0. Who knows what the exact team structure will look like? I'm pretty happy with the team structure. We'll obviously reveal Nathan's team and the SC community team last. And yeah, I know obviously the votes I've seen on Twitter, the SC community team will look slightly different with more premiums in other lines. But yeah, as I said, I think the biggest takeaway from this is, yes, this is a team of a build that will probably change a fair few times, but I would also not go out into Twitter and YouTube and look at other people's and go, right, this is a structure I need to follow. Yes, it's a structure, and yes, it might work for them, but I would say take the time to watch the AAMI games if you can, and if not, have a quick research on Twitter and there's lots of good information from other creators, including ourselves as well, if you want to listen to us ramble for an hour. But yeah, like as I said, it's the rookies dictate a lot of where your premiums sit. And the biggest mistake, or I think the biggest thing to recover from in a season as well of SuperCoach is if you get stuck with too many shit rookies that you're forced to field. I know, for example, that a lot like when I was last season, you had Gibcus go down very early. You had, I forgot his name, but the Essen Tall, the name will come to me at some point, but the Essen Tall defender who is a very, very slow burn. And when you're forced to pick key position rookies, particularly, and they have to be forced in your field because you don't have enough coverage as premiums, then yeah, that can be a slight problem. I know I lost out on a minimum of maybe 50, 60 points. And
Zach Reed.
Yeah, Zach Reed, that's the one. Yeah, so he obviously came good, but he's an example of a very, very slow burn. Gibcus, I could see being exactly that. And all you have to do is if you had an extra midfield rookie spot or a midfield forward spot, a forward rookie spot, and then have a mid defender premium to cover those poor scores, all of a sudden your scoring may look different. And I think as each year goes and there's more creators and more content being posted online in SuperCoach world, more and more teams get more template-y, and then it becomes harder and harder to find the points differential, and even harder if you start poorly, and that might not be no means your fault, but to try and catch up with the rest of the competition becomes even harder, especially if you're playing for overall. So, yeah, hopefully got some 2 cents worth out of this team review, and hopefully that'll give you some understanding where my brain and my thinking hat's on with regards to the last couple of weeks of pre-season and obviously the match sims and how that's affected my team. But as I said, next week we'll look at Nathan's team review. I know he's been busy trying to put something together. I know we've talked about in the past that his main focus is draft in season, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see his starting team for round 0. And then once all the votes are being accumulated and which players are drafted into the SC community team, that'll be the last team reveal. I don't think we'll do another team reveal of myself or Nathan's on video. We'll definitely post probably at least one of our final teams on Twitter to see how you guys go and how you guys think of it. But the SC community team, particularly with opening round starting in 2 weeks, will be the very last video that we probably post before the start of the season. But hopefully you enjoyed, and we'll catch you for Nate's team review.